Thank you, Rahul. Next up, we have a panel discussion from our alumni. I take this opportunity to introduce the moderators of this discussion first. We have Sandeep Kumar, KG, graduated in the year 2007 from EEE department. He's currently the solutions architect in Tata Consultancy Services. We also have with us Harish Balaji, who graduated in the year 2016 from the Department of IT. He has done MS in Computer Science from University of Florida, 2018, and at present he is working as a software development engineer in Amazon Seattle. Moving on to the speakers, we have Vinay Radhakrishnan, who passed out of the year 2017 from the Department of Civil Engineering. He is currently the vertical lead Seller Trust Strategy Facebook San Francisco. Next up, we have Sebastian Brito Stephen, who graduated in the year 2007 from the Department of EEE. He is presently the data architect in Nordea Bank, Oslo, Norway. We also have with us Preeti Gopal, who graduated in the year 2008 from the Department of EC. She has obtained a PhD from IIT Bombay. Next, we have Gautam Pichuka, who graduated in the year 2008 from the Department of Mechanical Engineering. He's a management consultant and has done his MBA from Monash Business School, Australia. We have with us Ashok Raj B, passed out of the year 2009 from the Department of EEE. He is currently the Senior Engineer in Manufacturing Micron Technology Inc., New South Wales, Australia. Next, we have Shyam Prasad, who graduated in the year 2011 from the Department of IT. He is the Senior Manager, Product and Revenue, Ola ANI Technologies Private Limited in Bangalore. Moving on, we also have with us Vivian Gunasingh, graduated in the year 2014 from the Department of EC. She is currently the Design Engineer in Global Foundries, Singapore. We also have with us Sushma Kambagauni, passed out of batch 2015 CSE. She has done her MBA from IIM Calcutta and has worked as a business consultant at Accenture. She is currently pursuing her PhD in management from Pittsburgh University. We have with us Gayatri Shankar, who graduated in the year 2017 from the Department of EEE. She's a Global Strategic Sourcing Specialist, VMware, Bangalore. And lastly, we have with us Naveen T. Rajendran, who graduated in the year 2019 from the Department of IT. He's currently working as a software engineer in Society Generale in Chennai. With this introduction, I now request the moderators and speakers to take over the platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Soundarya, for all the introduction. Just one clarification. I was told there might be results now announced prior to the panel discussion. Can you please check if that is the case?
Sure, I can do that.
Is there any of the other organizers here, like Najmu? I think Sandeep and I had talked to.
Sir, we can proceed with the panel discussion now.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So, just as an introduction, I wanted to start by mentioning some of the points I thought we could have in this panel discussion. The topic itself is very huge. There could be a range of points that we could have, and these are just a few pointers that are suggestions that we would like to hear from our panelists. So we could analyze the disparities that have been caused due to COVID-19 at the national level, comparing different nations and trying to see how people react to lockdown in a developed country versus a developing country, how they follow the rules. Or the other approach would be to just look at how COVID-19 has enforced capitalism. If you see, like, huge, billionaires have gotten richer, and migrant workers are still dying of hunger and stuff. So another way to look at it is at the household level. Just how many people have the privilege of working from home and how many don't? And even with working from home, is there a gender disparity? we can see that women, if present at home, they would have to care for their children. There is an unequal burden on care work when they are expected to cook, more times than not, or issues like that. And other than that, we could also look at how there is a digital divide. Like, you can see that some of the students get access to laptop and they can attend school like through online means, but others, some of them don't. So this is some of these points that we would love our panelists to speak on, elaborate. And also, like, one thing we observed from the last panel discussion, yesterday's webinar, was how everyone was able to like jot down points, and like if there was overlap from their points, they built on others' points. So we'd like to have a really nice discussion from everyone's. So let's get started. Also, Sandeep, do you want to add on something too?
No, I think that's great, Harish. A good piece of introduction from your side. I would not. I think that sets the right platform, and I think I'd like to call upon the associates. I think the entire panel is a gamut of the entire experience I have known. So there are two from 2007. We have two from 2008, one from 2009, and I think until 2019. So it's a good mix and match of the last 13 years of PEC. So I think that's going to be interesting. What different kind of aspects and different thoughts are going to pour in. I'll first like to call upon. Just so that all of the panelists are clear. Initially, all of you will get a minute or two to take a jab at the topic, and once we have concluded with the last speaker giving his 2 cents, then we will start going into a free-for-all kind of a discussion and see if there are questions.
This whole Scandinavian countries, first thing is they had a very effective governance on making sure that they will have this minimal income that was set for all the people. So because the big problem that happened in this pandemic, I would say, is the job loss, or people were unable to get the jobs or go to the jobs, everything. So first thing they made sure is like everyone will be supported at least for 6 months on a minimum income level. So in that way itself, they have actually put a bridge where there would be more on an economic disparity. When there is more on an economic disparity, it turns to a social disparity. So that is first thing. And second thing is when you say on the gender disparity, so here normally there is not much of a gender disparities here, so it wasn't much aggravated there. And then also on the adaptability. So here the government and also the people were very easy enough to adapt the change of life. Let it be on the social distancing, or on or to take care of their travels, or even to leave off their summer travel plans, and the banks who offered the payment holidays, and even for some people who were below the sufficient economy level, they given the mortgage discounts. So in lot of stuffs. And when it comes to the healthcare, so I really, it was evident to know that how worthy to have this universal healthcare, because with that universal healthcare here, the people with other health ailments were able to get the treatment prompt. So there are many. So what I realized is a good and effective governance and a very generic framework on a social and economic framework will really manage these disparities. Let it be of any type of disparities that comes into this pandemic. And this pandemic has set a kind of a trend-setting bar on how we need to react to the future kind of pandemics whenever that occurs. So this is what I saw in Scandinavian countries. Of course, there's been a different responses from governance from other countries with varying populations and socio-economic standards. But I really see that, I really believe that this kind of model can also be incorporated by other countries for managing the disparities. Thank you.
Yeah, next on, I think I'll call upon Vinay from the Civil Department from 2007 batch. And he's working with Facebook now. And thanks, Vinay. I think you were joining probably from the farthest of time zones. Must be 2:30 or 3 there.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty early.
We don't mind if you're going to yawn in between.
And all that, right? How's everybody? Okay, thank you for having me. Right, it's been a really long time since I've had conversations with folks from college. So pretty happy to be here. So what are we talking about? We're talking about COVID and the the aggravated disparities, right? Right. So where do we begin? I'm going to go a little higher. I mean, a little above what Brito was talking about. I think I'll touch on the fundamental problems that have actually been highlighted, right? I mean, problems that have always been there, but something that has been brought into mainstream. So like if you think about it, like what are I've been reading about these articles about how the rich has in fact been getting richer through this corona, and how the poor obviously are quickly running out of the savings, right? So the inequality in terms of economics, the wealth gap, which was always there, but something that has come into light in the recent times. But I'm not really surprised in this particular turnout, obviously, because the rich has access to financial instruments that's not accessible to everybody, right? So that was one of the more prominent disparities that I could come across. The other one is also access to healthcare. We're starting to realize that not everybody has pretty much the same level of access to healthcare across the world. Take it pretty much any nations, you're gonna see that. And as this particular pandemic we go through it, we're going to see that more pronounced So yeah, I mean, now what does that really mean, right? I mean, we are starting to see worldwide protests, which obviously will exacerbate as we get closer. So yeah, in terms of what are the actual disparities I've seen being aggravated, I would probably have to start with uh, the economic gap and access to healthcare, right? In terms of like where do we go from here, Brito was talking about, hey, I mean, I mean, the Scandinavian government has obviously done a pretty good job, but then again, what have they had to deal with, right? They didn't really have to do with the kind of population density a lot of other countries have to deal with, which is obviously going to have impact on access to healthcare, the ability for the government to manage access to such services. So yeah, I mean, at this particular point, I think we're only starting to see the effects of pandemic and starting to come in terms with the reality. And as we obviously move forward, it'll be interesting to see how different regions respond and start taking care of the populace.
Great, Vinay. Thank you. I'll get back to you when we start going more open and free up the discussion. I'd call upon Preeti from the 2008 batch, ECE, and yes, Preeti. Preeti, you are there?
Ma'am, I think you're on mute.
Oh, it'll take me a while to get used to with this mute always. This happens in every meeting. So thank you, Sandeep, and I'm feeling quite happy to get in touch with you all. Probably I met only a few of you in the campus. So it's nice to talk with you, especially on this important topic. So my take on this is it has disrupted so many parts of our society. The most important thing I think is we have a very myopic view, a short-term view of this, and we need to take a long-term view. In the sense, 90% of the deaths due to COVID are because of people who already have hypertension, diabetes, obesity, lung disease, asthma, and other chronic diseases. So, but the focus has always been on the next vaccine and on the number of ventilators and how to prevent social distancing and other things. Of course, those are very important. But if we are weak, if we are weak as a species, then even a weak virus will create a havoc. So this is not a very strong virus, even experts say, but so I think the focus should be on, in general, how to reduce the chronic diseases in the country in the long term, like over the next 5 years, 10 years, and nobody's talking about it. It's like we are not at fault. Somehow we are the victims. The virus has attacked us, and now we are dealing with it. It's not that we are not at our best in terms of health. So I wouldn't say the next vaccine is a solution. I think if we are the diabetic capital of the world, then that's also an underlying problem, and people who have chronic diseases are at high risk. So I think we are not looking at the causes, we are looking at the solutions. So I'm very disturbed by that. In fact, I'm disturbed because 3 out of 4 pandemics outbreaks have happened due to either an animal farming or wet market. But once things get done and again the wet market reopens, for example in Beijing last week, and again they shut down. I mean, what are we even we aren't looking back at things. When you cram, see, when the virus attacks us, we need social distancing, but you can't cram animals together in industrial farming. So there is something wrong with that as well. And if there is an infection in one animal, it will spread like fire onto everything in the industrial farm. And so I'm sad that we are not taking care of our health. Chronic diseases, I'm sad that we are not taking care of the cause, which is which is 3 out of 4, I'm not telling all pandemics, 3 out of 4 pandemics are because of our state of industrial farming, industrial animal agriculture especially. And the last, of course, people are dying, people are suffering, but I would also like to tell that there are thousands and millions of animals that are being culled. So so they're just being culled because now the markets have shut down. So the animals which we breed into existence are culled. So I'm talking like an animal rights activist, but I identify myself in that category. So if we don't treat them well, we are not going to escape. Maybe we escape this pandemic, it'll hit us the next one. So we have to talk about prevention and not just how many deaths, how many, what is have we flattened the curve and the obsession with flattening the curve. So I think we have to talk about what are the real reasons, and that can be a slow discussion, but it has to happen.
Thanks, Preeti. I think that's an insight which probably a lot of us, and especially the people who are on the front, may be missing. So I think that's essential. I will take a cue from that and come back to you later. So may I call upon Gautam to give his intro and pitch in with his point. Gautam?
Yeah, thanks, Sandeep. Nice to meet you after a long time.
Yes.
Yeah. So what I would do is, I'm currently in Australia now, so I'll probably give a difference between the first point which Harish mentioned. What's the difference between how developed countries and developing countries are dealing? And in my opinion, I think India is definitely doing a lot better because India has its own problems, but there are certain things developed countries have the luxury to. For example, social distancing. In India, there are minimum 4 people in a house, but here it's like 1 or 2 people, maximum 2 people in a house. And even with the population sizes, the whole population of Australia is itself 25 million, and let's take Mumbai, which is close to 18 million, just a city. So there's no comparison on that scale. And then education levels. I've been in touch with my parents, almost every day, who are living in Chennai, and my mom says, there are some people, who don't even know what's a virus. How would you treat them? And there was this funny video where one of the guy was given hand sanitizer, and he took it in his mouth. That's the difference in education levels. And I think Preeti made a great point on healthcare systems. The healthcare spending in India is one of the lowest. So I think the lockdown initially, did a great job because we can't have our healthcare systems overfilled, and that becomes very dangerous. And then there are other problems Australia face. While I'm quite fortunate that I've been in one of the probably the safest place at this point of time. I even went for a restaurant yesterday, so that's the luxury I have. But Australia has its own problems. For example, because of this lockdown, there has been an increase in domestic violence cases. So I would say when you're trying to compare 2 different things, like developed countries and developing countries, it's not an apples to apple comparison. So each one has to deal it with differently, and they come up with different solutions. One thing probably we didn't do really well is we didn't really consider the immigrant workers. We shouldn't really be calling immigrants, but those movement is something we didn't expect. And I think at the moment, all the governments are definitely experimenting. It's something new. They haven't dealt with this, before at this scale. But also on the other side, I see there's a, whole global leadership crisis. World needs better leaders.
Thank you, Gautam. Yes, world definitely needs better leaders, better think tanks, I would say, than just the leaders. And, so let me call upon Ashok from the 2009 batch. Ashok.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashok Raj. Hi Sandeep bro, Brito, and many familiar faces here. First of all, happy Father's Day Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. So I would like to first say thank you very much for having me here, and I'm very delighted to be here. So I would like to start with a question: who is the best couple in the world? Can we guess? Like maybe Michelle, Barack Obama, or many would say my parents. If you ask me, I would say my wife and I. So regarding this topic, in reality, our problems and possibilities make the best couple. So today we have a problem of disparities that has aggravated due to COVID-19. So I would like to quote the famous speaker Zig Ziglar. If we need to overcome our problems, we need to first acknowledge that we have a problem. So first accepting and addressing these problems now creates possibility for a resilient future. So what we need to do now, we need to recognize and address there are disparities, like disparities in financial strain and food shortages that we are facing globally. There are possibilities happening like free utilities kit and free electricity that are provided by the government. We need to see disparity in online classes. There are possibilities happening to boost network connectivity, increase bandwidth, reach rural areas through radio and television, DTH broadcast. Disparity in transport and migrant workers, like Gautam has mentioned, who are facing difficulty in interstate movement. We are also seeing possibilities like self-sustaining cities and homes, growing own terrace farms, utilizing local talents within the states. More fast connected transport modes are going to come in the future. Gender disparity like single income family run by women, there are possibilities happening like United Nations COVID 50-50 policy that provides equal opportunity for women in jobs, and also for women facing domestic violence. There are possibilities happening like United Nations Spotlight Initiative, putting cash in women's hand and extending basic protection to informal workers. And also there are steps going on to build economic and social policies to support them. Disparities in sectors such as IT and non-IT, we will see possibilities like young talents are going to choose more manufacturing and health sectors. So what we need to focus now is to bridge these current problems with the possibilities by bringing these disparities to the limelight through media, social networks, working with government, NGOs, publicizing helplines. So that's what we can do now. We must understand that it is in the best interest of all to contain the virus. That's what I have now. Yeah. Any questions? I'm open for questions and discussions.
Sandipana, are you there?
Yes, Sandipana.
So I didn't have the list. So this, thank you, Ashok. I guess next we can go to whoever has, who wants to go next.
Thank you.
We'll get back to you later with questions. We want to go one round. Everyone gets their initial views out.
Yeah, I think next would be Shyam Prasad, going in chronological order.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi.
Yeah.
Shyam here, 2011 batch. I think Sandeep and I, I also met, and Gautam, of course, we met you the same thing. I wanted to bring probably a new, let's say, perspective of different stakeholders here, right? So, having like being somebody who's been working in the startup ecosystem in India for a while now, not just within people and individual and societies and government, right? I also see a different level or a different reaction to the entire COVID pandemic in itself, right? So if you look at it, it was something that nobody could have foreseen the scale or impact and the ripple effect that it is causing. Right? That is uniform, or let us say, different sectors have felt different of impact per se, right? But what I'm seeing, or what we're seeing, is that in terms of preparedness or a general, let us say, ability to deal with a disruption, right? So-called established industries are comparatively better, at least in India, so to speak, right? So, for example, automobile is also an industry which has been hugely impacted from the entire COVID, right? So that has been impacted for a long time, and the COVID has, of course, let us say, aggravated the impact per se, right? And comparing that to impact on all B2C or consumer-driven startups per se, right? Who are also equally impacted. But all we see in the news is about startups laying off people left, right, and center because they don't have revenues in place, they don't have cash flows in place, and it's a question of survival for them, right? And when the same, let us say, point is mono, if you look at more established players in the market, at least in the auto industry per se, like let's say Tata Motors of the world, or the Mahindras of the world, or let's say the Marutis of the world, they have not laid off to the extent to which, let us say, the startup industry per se has laid off, right? So this exposes, I would say, a fundamental, let us say, preparedness to deal with something like that. What I see is that that is not globally the case. Globally, different industries have reacted differently, but in India more so, I see a trend where the established players in the market have kind of been resilient enough, or at least have created a balance sheet for themselves to be resilient to take such a wide impact or a pandemic per se, right? While the startups, the big unicorns that we have in the country, be it the Paytms or the Oyos and Olas of the world per se, right, have not been able to take an impact of this size, right? So it exposes that businesses generally have different approach towards dealing with the pandemic, and this so has aggravated the fundamental difference. Startups which are otherwise seen as, let's say, growth engine and, let's say, job opportunities which are provided to the economy, right? And this exposes something that is fundamentally, let's say, very different when startups or established companies approach a pandemic like this, right? The second one I wanted to probably bring to attention was, so even among the privileged class who kind of have the privilege of not
Shyam, I will just hold you on there for some time, Shyam. I would like you to bring this topic when we are in for the free for all, and I would quickly call upon Vivlin to give a short note, as we had some network problems, so we will not be able to give all 2-3 minutes. But I would call upon Vivlin to quickly give in at least your view, and then we will go into an free for all, where I'll ensure that you people get more time to speak. Yeah.
Thank you. So I would like to touch on like gender disparity and the migrant workers disparity that Harish mentioned. So as far as gender disparity is concerned, I think it has always existed. It was probably more in balancing work and life was probably more difficult for women in pre-COVID-19 situation than now. I think now most of them are finding more time, and a lot of companies have come up with great initiatives. My workplace has given like 2 weeks of paid leave for those who cannot find childcare options. So those are some things that I think are actually positive in this situation. And as far as the migrant crisis is concerned, I know that in India we saw that there were a lot of horrendous instances, and I live in Singapore. So here, out of the 20,000 cases that Singapore has had, a lot of them are migrant workers from India. That has been the huge number of spikes because they live in certain, very small dormitories, so they've seen huge numbers. So I think that has sort of taken out the glossiness of going abroad in India, and people's mindset has come down a little bit. That's kind of an awareness that has been created, because when migrant workers here wanted to go back home, or even those of us who had to get our passports renewed or anything, it was a huge difficulty. going to the embassy, and we had to pay around $300 something to get our passports renewed because all the prices had spiked. You just couldn't get an appointment anymore. Newborn babies weren't getting passports and all that. So I think like people started looking at whole of migration with a very critical perspective. That's something that COVID has mapped here.
Thank you, Vivlen. Thank you. May I call upon Sushma?
Yeah, hi. So, yeah, we have all seen different disparities which have been highlighted over the last few months, but I would want to pick up on education as a sector. So, primary schools are the one which are worst hit according to me, because those were like places where physical real interaction was the most, and now suddenly everyone has to shift to online learning. And now the privileged and who have access, both in terms of the schools having resources and the students having resources, are still able to continue their education. But there are a lot of people, millions of students who don't have access to this. And a major thing that all of us have lost the discussion in terms of the country is not talking about is the midday meal scheme. A lot of students go to school in rural areas or the urban backward areas just because of the midday meal scheme. That's how I personally have convinced some parents to send their kids to school. And now the midday meal scheme is gone. They don't have access, and the parents are burdened with the labor shortage because they don't have work to go. So that might push the children into child labor again, or early marriages, or even worse, sexual exploitation. So this is something that everyone in the country needs to discuss, and some initiatives need to be taken care of in handling these issues. That's something I wanted to highlight.
Thank you, Sushma. Thank you. May I call upon Gayatri?
Hello, everybody. Good evening, and it's good to see all of you. I think I currently am experiencing one of the downfalls of COVID-19. I'm having a power outage, and I mean, it is actually affecting a lot of us who are working from home. And I think it calls for an India that could focus on the infrastructural developments. And I'm pretty sure that most of the companies that we live in are looking at a different workplace policy. They're calling it Workplace 2.0. And a lot of the MNCs are currently looking at that. And one good side that I could see from that is we could pretty much work from anywhere in the world. It necessarily need not have to be your house or the office. So, I mean, we are traveling towards a shift that could give us a totally different paradigm when it comes to working. So this is a positive aspect that I'm seeing, but I mean, it calls for all the bright minds to come together and bring up another level of revolution altogether. Thank you.
Thanks, Sushma. Thank you. Thank Gayatri. I would call upon Naveen to.
Yes, Sandeep. So this is Naveen, and just starting with the point, I just start with the positive side in that it's just slow down all this corona lockdown, everything, and just slow down the velocity of our life. Actually, it forced us to enjoy the different aspects of life, and it just showed the importance of time around our own family. And many untold stories have been told. Friends who have got separated over the years got some time to renew their relationship. But all this have happened only for just 25% of the people. The rest, the lockdown have destroyed the day-to-day livings of theirs. In this context, I would like to highlight the migrant workers who have been severely affected by COVID-19 because they have to make money only by moving. So we can see them everywhere: hotels, the small industries, constructions, metro stations, and where not. Yet we never imagined migrant workers as a group big enough to protest or to taken seriously. We understand their ability to unite. So they were not allowed to unite even in a state like West Bengal or Kerala. Now we have come under the light line, like the governments and policymakers, economics and others now know that they cannot take this migration so much lightly as before. The estimate says that close to 500 million Indians are today are internal migrants. As we've been told about the external migrants, these internal migrants either living in a place where they didn't born and did not live in for past 6 months ago. Of this, the ones mainly affected by this lockdown are the worker migrants. These would be at least 30% of the total migrant population. So this constitutes about 150 million people in the country who move from the home state to another for work. We are still talking about the immediate outcome of COVID-19, which is life or death. by the time we start thinking about the livelihood or of the migrant workers, we would have nearly lost half of their population, and the efforts all our efforts will go in vain. And that's it from my Sandeep.
Thanks, Praveen. So that was a good intro from all of you. And as we are running short of time, I would quickly ask our host to publish the results of a poll which we had sent out somewhere by afternoon. And Najmu, can we have that somewhere shown? Yes. So we had asked a lot of them what's the impact of COVID in your life, and what is your perception of the impact of COVID on others' life. And if you see, I think the results are there. It's been worst. So now cutting short and not detailing much, not trying to read between the lines of this result, I would want to take an aspect out of it and try to go to Vinay and ask, how do you think the corporates where the engineers from PEC or all the engineers who are going to join, how is it going to affect them? What is the disparity which has come up in workplace, and how is it possible to manage that?
All right, so the question is, what has changed in the work environment, right? All right, with COVID, not every industry was affected proportionally, right? I mean, there are, for instance, we started to realize that, industries where the employees were mostly working on the technology or the software sector, I mean, they are able to continue working with minimal interruptions to their work. Like, for instance, I've been working from home for a while. I'm probably going to be working from home for the foreseeable future. But industries where people have to actually go in the presence, be it the restaurant industry, be it the healthcare industry, obviously, they are suddenly being asked to risk a lot more than the rest of the folks are. Also, in terms of the shift in terms of what industries are focusing on, right? What's going through it with COVID in terms of shifting priorities are pretty much like how you would approach a particular war. The productivity has come down. A lot of industries are going to be repurposed. For instance, I was reading this article where Fitbit is making ventilators now. So obviously that's a big shift in technology. So these are the industries that are going to open up. There's going to be a lot of focus on healthcare, palliative care, those aspects of it. In terms of technology, we're seeing leaps and bounds in terms of communication aspects, right? What is this? There's Google Meet. There is Microsoft Teams coming up. There is a lot of Zoom kept going up. In terms of industries that help productivity, like workplace, Slack, they're all certainly picking up. People are paying more attention to that. So those are the things, right? I mean, there's certainly going to be opportunities that weren't always there. There are going to be industries that are going to be accelerated, which would have taken a long time. And it's going to affect industries, I mean, in terms of the workforce disproportionately. I mean, we are going to have to come up with very, very creative ways to solve a lot of particular problems. But I mean, we should certainly focus on the opportunities.
Thanks. So there were two people, or I think more than two people, who were really focused on attempting or were trying to put the focus on the migrant workers. I think what we have seen the reports from the United Nations and others, so I would want to go to Biblin with the question. See, India does not have an organized legal working mechanism for the blue collar jobs. So we are really, when we say migrant workers, it's not migrant workers. The people from Tamil Nadu who were working in Tamil Nadu, or people from Pondicherry working in Pondicherry, but who did not have a legalized waiver, are the people who are suffering. Yes, it is easy to say that they are migrant in terms. I mean, I would even say a person who has traveled from Tanjavur to Chennai as a migrant. Does not matter whether he has traveled to Chennai, he has traveled to Kerala, or either ways. Right? So India does not have a legalized working mechanism. So do you see something in that area which might help? And do you see something parallel in Singapore where you are there? Is there such kind of a system?
Actually, I think in Singapore also so far, there were a lot of construction companies, etc., which used huge amount of migrant labor, but they weren't given proper accommodation. There were like hundreds of them in dormitories. And initially, when this virus hit, we were hit a lot earlier, around end of Jan, early Feb, immediately after China. the concentration was more on the general public, and somehow this became a blind area, just like I think how it happened in India. The migrant workers became a blind area. And none of these businesses which employ these migrant laborers owed up to it. They didn't step up and say, let's do something about the healthcare. So the government had to step in and take care of these people once it started flaring up. So now I think they are coming up with very critical reforms that these companies which use migrant labor should step up and provide accommodation for them, which accommodation with social distancing and everything. When situations like this happen, they can't just desert them. They are being held accountable now. But I think even in Singapore, it was a blind side. They didn't immediately respond to it when they should have.
Thanks, Vivle. Thank you. So going back to Shyam, I think Shyam, you had a point on the economic disparity. See, we do understand the economic disparity amongst it's a broader disparity which we can pull between the the blue collar and the white collar jobs. But I would want to understand whether there is really an economic disparity between or amongst the ones who really have a good job, who have a secure job in place, but still there has been a growing economic disparity even between those lines. I think Vinay did point out earlier where the richer are becoming rich and the poorer are getting poorer, but there is a huge population which is somewhere in between. So what is the line between these two, and how is that going to have an effect? We have seen the kind of investments Jio has been able to bring in over the last 1 month, and from a 70% debt under debt organization, it has gone to become debt free, and in fact has been now trying to buy out another retail industry itself. So what is your view on that, Shyam?
The first one, Sandeep, if I get it right, you're trying to understand what about the middle class. Is that largely what you're trying to want me to touch upon?
Yes, essentially, yes. I mean, what do you think is the economic disparity between or within the working class itself? And how is that going to, whether it's going to stabilize, it's going to be for the good, or it's going to get worse?
Okay. Right. So I definitely see a prolonged and a drawn out impact for the people who, let us say, make wages, or let us say who sit in the entire earning bucket of a 1 lakh per year kind of an income, right? So anybody who's more so between, let us say, anything more than 5 lakhs per se might have a lesser impact, and the medium or the term to which they are impacted might be shorter. But anybody who is going to sit between, let us say, less than 1 lakh, I see a much more drawn out impact, because we are stuck in a cyclical problem. Like, there is no demand, and hence businesses are not investing in growth because it just hit somebody. We either need some intervention from a government or some kind of an intervention from any industry body, or somebody needs to own and get the cycle of economy kick-started, right? So until consumer demand doesn't spike up, companies are not going to invest in new projects or invest in new capability, starting new projects or starting new assembly lines, etc., right? And that is going to have a ripple effect on jobs, and that will not kickstart the consumer demand again. So we definitely need, I believe, definitely an intervention from the government or any other body, either RBI, who's already doing a good job, but banks are not passing on the benefit of cheaper rates to the actual businesses in need. I see more profound impact on people who make, let us say, anywhere up to 0 to 1 lakh per year kind of a term, and something has to be done to get the consumer demand.
Thank you, Shyam. I would go to Gautam, who has been asked a question by Harish, wherein there's a question on, isn't the reverse exodus of migrant workers a clear case of human negligence, which is an important indicator that India hasn't handled the crisis well? Gautam?
Yeah, I think before even going to that question, India doesn't have proper labor laws. It's mostly unorganized sector, where people get, probably, they get paid on each day, probably. There are certain companies, like let's say the Tatas or the Marutis, they do, proper have, they pay the PF, EPS or whatever that stuff. But a measure of the the construction workers, I think they just work, on cash on hand, right? Probably they work today and get 100 rupees, and they don't have proper rights. If that can be fixed, there will be a surety that they would properly, let's say, take the example where a guy from let's say a village in Tamil Nadu is moving to Chennai and live there. Unless he has that social security or an economic security that he works in an organized job, these things are going to repeat. They would go back, unless they have a proper house and there's a future forecast of cash coming into them. They're not gonna settle at one place. So having clear labor laws and worker rights, worker unions, I think if the basics are fixed, these things can be handled better.
Yeah, I would like to go to Sebastian, who has done typing his answer. But Sebastian, I think for the audience who are watching it, it will be great if you can actually try to bring out the aspect that you just mentioned.
Yes, thanks, Sandeep. So what I was looking at dialogues from all of you, what I can see is we are looking at the possibilities on this pandemic. So when I took at each and every point and then when I connected to a dot, so in a generic, see what we require is a inclusive governance. It might be a simple two-word, but it has really a lot of things to incorporate. Let it be economy, so job opportunities. Today with all the technology, we have to make each and every workable citizen identifiable through an ID and put them into our tax laws and make sure that in these kind of pandemics, so they are being supported well. That's one thing. The same way, if they are identifiable, we can, we have a so big technology today where we can even go and personalize their data. So we can know their health conditions. We can easily track down the number of pregnant women in an area and whether they can be, how they can be secured in this kind of pandemic. So and also thinking about the healthcare, Preeti made a wonderful point that this pandemic is something that has brought in the holes that we already have. So this has brought in the realistic thing that we were not having a good immunity for our chronic diseases. So this kind of healthcare framework can make sure that how to enhance our immunities, how to safeguard our children. And let us take education. Someone pointed out that not many people are having an online access. So will this not be known if there is no pandemic? So I still work with an NGO who work for 4 states in India, and they are working hard to get that simple computer accessibility to schools. So this wouldn't have been known if there is no pandemic. And those schools are today, the students can't have an access to online courses. So the underlying problems has to be addressed, and all these things has to be put into framework, and that's how inclusive governance come in. I really don't want to go to the political aspect of it, but this is something has to be thought. It might be a long way, but when we can achieve something like that, it's a long-term solution for India. Thank you.
Thanks, Brito. From you, taking cue from the healthcare system and the focus on health, and I'd like to go back to Preeti and ask on a particular aspect. See, we know that Indians are in general not a very health conscious system, but I think even though we are so, if I count the deaths per million, I'm not talking about the number of deaths per se, but if I take the statistics of deaths per million, I think one of the countries with the highest count has been Switzerland. Switzerland has a mammoth 2,758 deaths in million, which is among the top 5 as per COVID. And it is a country with an average life expectancy of 97 years. So is it true to say that health care or taking care of your health is in itself a factor, or are we also talking about other factors which might have come up, or are these numbers in itself a complete bogus? I mean, are we just looking at numbers which are we know to a fair front that the numbers we are seeing, be it on national front, international front, are all not the true numbers. But then the kind of these available numbers do pose a question whether we really have a trouble with the Indian health, the health of the average Indian.
Yeah, thanks Sandeep for the question. So as far as comparison with other countries are concerned, I'm not very an expert in that if we are comparing on similar grounds. So I have no opinion about if we are landing on the right numbers and what those numbers indicate. But I just want to tell that when I look at people around in my family itself, there'll be one person with hypertension, one person with diabetes, and one person with asthma. So I can just easily count. So when I say healthcare, I don't mean the number of hospitals or the number of beds in a hospital. I mean as you pointed out, I mean the fitness of us, because we are a young country. Most of us are around 35. Not in this meeting, I mean in general, largely we are a young country. So so at least the people who are young should be fit, but we are having chronic diseases even amongst youngsters. So so on a personal level, we can take care of it by eating well, sleeping well, and exercising. I think these are in the right order, not exercising first and then sleep, and then of course sleep, food, and then exercise later. But I think at the policy level, I would push for subsidies for organic farming, subsidies for clean eating, and we know that predominantly a plant-based diet is very, very healthy. So you give more subsidies to fruits and vegetables rather than other animal agricultural products, at least at this instant in time. So from the policies, where do my tax money go for subsidies? That bothers me. And on a personal level, of course, can I be without? It's not normal to have diabetes, hypertension, and other things. And especially when I see people, for example, with cancer from Punjab and Haryana, because a lot of pesticides are used, they have a special train all the way to Tata Cancer Hospital in Mumbai in the pre-COVID era. So the personal health is not in a good condition, and the government is also not placing its money in the right time. We are a disease managing healthcare system. We are not a fitness promoting healthcare system.
Fully agree with that. I have started doing yoga. Imagine, after I in this COVID time period. I think that's the right team. I think a lot of people have started putting their focus on health and things like that. I would now try to bring in one last question. Najmu has been pushing me to close it, but I'll try to bring in one question last, and I would want Harish also to take a hit at the answer, trying to answer is, what is the biggest disparity an engineering graduate from Pondicherry Engineering College would see or has seen or would see, and how and what should he make of it? This is my question. So maybe I'll let Harish answer first, and then I would go to Sushma, who did speak about the educational disparity. So I would want Harish to take a hit at it.
Yeah, so as an engineer from PEC, the huge disparity that I see is safety, safety of some of the disparity in safety and ability to work from home. So I feel that in some of my friends in India do not have this luxury of being able to work from home and also just stay at home. They might have to go out for groceries and stuff, or they do have to do that. I haven't seen another person, I haven't had a conversation face to face for nearly 100 days. I just order groceries, it comes here, and then I'm so privileged in that sense. I feel that others do have issues, they can't say no to their manager. So even I saw Gautam's point regarding flexibility from everyone, from the previous talk. That also shows that sometimes when managers ask you to work on weekends, the mindset for some of my friends who are working in India, it's different. As an engineer, they might have to comply with working over the weekends. Those issues are a huge disparity that kind of surprises me and is affecting me, making me think.
Thanks, Harish. Thanks. So, Sushma, I would want your views on this.
Yeah. So more than the disparity, I think the biggest effect of COVID has been on jobs, and like many companies who have given even campus offers have rescinded their offers. So for a campus graduate just out of campus, it might be a very tricky situation right now that you'll be so worried. But now, yesterday even in Vivian's talk, she was telling like there are a lot of things to do now in terms of creating your passion, learning from different mediums. So that's where I think people should focus on in terms of learning. Even if you're facing a situation where you have lost your job, you worked so hard for it, you might feel, why did I work hard? Just see on to the positives, hold on to the positives, that you're getting to stay with your parents for a little longer time. You had some passion that you couldn't find time to take, just nurture it during your engineering, just focus on it. A lot of people have become stars on different platforms these days. So possibilities are many. Just you need to focus all your energy on the positivity and just find out what you really want to do. Jobs will come and go. They are not the end and means of everything. So that's something I would want to tell everyone in terms of education.
I think that was great, and I would now go to Ashok asking insights on the same question as to what, in your view, would be the disparity which will hit the students or which would aid the students.
Hi Sandeep, thanks for the question. So, like everyone are facing one form of disparity in the current situation. So it's just focusing on the situation and then trying to knock the doors of possibilities especially for students who are facing a situation like they have come to a halt of no placements, or all the companies are closed the doors. So it's the right time for them to equip with new courses or upskill themselves towards their job. For example, when I passed out of 2009, when I was entering into Tata Consultancy, I don't know what is Excel or something, because I'm from EEE. I don't know how to use. Everything was like they held my hand and then they taught me everything. But for students now, this is the right time for them to sit at home, study by their own. There are a lot of skill share site and a lot of courses, even big universities are offering courses. They can utilize this time. And some students, even they are not good at academics, or they may be mediocre, but some may be good at art. Some may be teaching music, or some may be able to teach students, or some may want to learn painting, or this is the time to open their mind. So that will help in some point in their life, because if I'm not good at this, I can still conduct an online class or teach some student in some point of my life. So this is the time to knock the door and
Thank you. Thanks, Ashok. And I think I wouldn't drag on more. I think there are a lot of other activities which need to go in. I couldn't get my batchmate Ashwin to come in and give in some conclusion, though, but he was kind enough to pass on the wonderful message. So what he says is, when we listen and celebrate what is both common and different between us, we become wiser, more inclusive and better as a species. Evolution has taught us precisely this, and the best example is the opposable thumbs, which might have looked weird on the monkeys when it started, but had become the key for humans to write. So I think embracing the disparities is what is going to help us to get the optimal outcome, and probably that would be for the betterment. We know there are disparities, but I think these blaring disparities are now on the face of the policymakers, is on the face of the think tanks, be it the corporate issues, be it the national issues of migrant workers, be it the corporate issues of gender equality at work. But I think all the policymakers, the think tanks have these issues on their face, and they also are forced into a situation where they need to work out a solution which is possible and favorable for all of us, and at the same time also sets the right tenet and sets the right precedent for years to come, ages to come. So as we have been hearing for the last 1 year, like workplace 4.0, business 4.0, technology 4.0, workforce 4.0, I think it is time where the entire system, the governing systems, be it of the national level, state, panchayat, district, rural, corporate, schools, colleges, everybody will have to take a look at the blaring issues they have at face, try to arrive at a solution, and try to improve one at a time, try to solve the problems by looking at countries, examples, cities, states who have been able to do one step better than themselves, and try to inculcate that onto them. I think that would be the way for us to move forward and probably try to close. So I will call upon Harish in case you would want to add a few words to conclude the same.
Yes, thank you. So basically, one more thing I missed out, a stark difference that I find is like we need to take into account the uneven burden on women when they have to work from home. This, I believe, is something I see as a disparity, and especially because when they're working from home, they might have to provide care work for kids at home, as well as they might be expected to cook more because everyone is at home now, and there is no option of having lunch at work, having snacks outside. So this is a huge issue that we don't talk about enough, and I think everyone can do their part when we think about this. And I would also like to thank everyone who made this possible, Shanti Simon ma'am, because I thought of making this as a chance to have her speak on a panel, but ever so elegantly she just makes us get the platform and goes in the background. So I would like to thank her, and then Sandeep Anna for moderating this and making sure this is a procedural, this has structure. And all the organizers, I'd be wrong if I miss out any name. So anyone who, I specifically contacted Rupam and Najmu, but everyone who helped with this. And I'd like to thank my good friend Arya Shrikala for this topic. She kind of opened my eyes in certain areas regarding this. So, thanks to everyone who's made this possible. And last but not least, all the panelists who made this discussion very fruitful and gave your opinions and thoughts and enlightened us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone who has joined in so late and from varied time zones. Vinay, Ashok, Gautam, I think probably sitting the farthest from the Indian time zone. So thank you guys. Thanks for being part of this, and thanks everybody else joining. And all the best for all of you wherever you are doing whatever you are. Great. Thank you.